Coming at you on the morning of Monday, June the 19th, 2023. It's episode 7 of Exit Philosophy with Richard Griffin. Griff, I'm Scott MacArthur, Scotty Mac. And the Blue Jays, as we sit here, Griff, are 6 games into a 9-game road trip that caps against a very good, all of a sudden, Miami Marlins team. 2-4 so far. Series losses in Baltimore. Man, they have not played the Orioles well. And in Texas, and they should have taken 2 out of 3 from the Rangers.
Yeah, and the Texas Rangers under Bruce Bochy have been a much improved team. We've been previewing that since the start of Exit Philosophy, that they were going to be very good. But they've taken that division. They're ahead of the Houston Astros, who traditionally have dominated the AL West. But the Rangers, they built their offense. They signed Marcus Semien and Corey Seager, and then they went the next winter and built their rotation. And yeah, DeGrom is out for a while, but you look at some of the pitchers that threw against the Blue Jays on the weekend, and they've got a solid rotation, and they've got a dynamic offense, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in October.
Man, the Sunday loss was disappointing, right? Because fans, Griff, have just been clamoring for this offense to wake up and do something. And, I mean, it didn't matter on Friday night because Kevin Gausman was awesome. That guy's going to get Cy Young votes. I think you can make the argument he should win the American League Cy Young to date this season. I know we've still got another half season's worth of baseball to play. And Jordan Romano came in and did his deal. Coming in the 8th inning and locking things down, second closer in the game this season to hit 20 saves. I still express my reservations, but credit where credit is due. Shout out to the local boy. Then on Sunday, you get the offensive breakout early, and you're looking around and you're saying, Chris Bassitt's on the mound. There are 3 starting pitchers the Blue Jays have that when you're out to a 5-6 run lead, you're thinking, we're in good shape today. Gausman would be one. Jose Barrios, who I think you could make the argument is the team MVP, not just for how well he is pitching, but for the fact that he is pitching extremely well in a time when Alek Manoah fell off a cliff. Like, in some ways, he saved the length of that rotation, and Chris Bassitt. But Bassitt fell apart, betrayed by some defense. You think, though, Griff, another key moment happened in the 3rd inning of that game that changed the entire course of the way Chris Bassitt was going to pitch that day.
Yeah, I believe that Barrios is the most important pitcher on this team because of the reasons that you gave. But when I was watching Sunday's game and saw the hit by pitch of Alejandro Kirk, and it was a laceration and a contusion. I mean, to me, if it's your catching hand and you have that going on, you might as well put him on the 10-day IL. You might see Tyler Heineman come to Miami and join the team. And later in the week, we'll know soon enough. But that was a key moment for me in terms of Bassitt's game, because now Danny Jansen comes in, and even though Chris Bassitt calls his own pitches, and people go, well, what does it matter who's behind the plate for you? That moment to me became, this 5-0 lead, which turned into 6-0 lead, there's a distinct possibility this isn't going to last, because after Bassitt's outing, counting the innings that he pitched with Danny Jansen behind the plate, he's now allowed 20 earned runs in 16 innings in 4 games. So that's an average of 4 innings per outing with Jansen back there, and an ERA of 11.40. And try and explain that when a guy's calling his own pitches. But my theory on that is that Alejandro Kirk has a reputation of presenting pitches at the bottom of the strike zone. And I'm not going to say framing pitches, because I hate catchers who catch it outside the zone and then bring it back into the zone. And I know that pisses umpires off, because it pisses them off in every level that I've ever coached or watched. So it's presenting the pitch. And Alejandro Kirk, being, of course, closer to the ground than Danny Jansen to begin with, is presenting that pitch and getting strike calls. So now instead of a 2-1 count on a two-seamer at the bottom of the zone, instead of a 2-1 count that Jansen lost, it's a 1-2 count because Kirk just nailed it at the bottom of the zone, and now it's a completely different at bat, a completely different game for Chris Bassitt. And so, like, there is more to it. And remember, at spring training, Bassitt was always talking about each pitch in his repertoire, his 8-pitch repertoire, where he wanted his catchers setting up in different positions. So there's more to it than I'm calling my own game, and here it comes, just catch it. There's more to it than that. And my theory is that they need the combination of Bassitt and Kirk for Bassitt to be the pitcher that he showed in the games, obviously, that Jansen hasn't caught for him.
Yeah, and Kirk spent so much time with Bassitt. Alejandro got to spring training late, of course, because he and his partner had their child, and he spent a lot of time with Bassitt and had to put that work in. But it's interesting because a lot of the time, you and I'll sit here, Griff, and we'll say, and of course, you know, you're starting catcher that day. You're not accounting for who he may catch later in the ball games. You can't predict that. The games have to play out. But so often we'll sit here and say, man, Jordan Romano, for example, is a better pitcher when he's throwing to Danny Jansen. Now, he's not calling his own pitches. He can shake, but he's not calling his own pitches. And Jansen, it seems, with guys like Romano, is more inclined to try to get his pitcher to throw the fastball more often. It's a different situation, you're saying, with Bassitt, because he's got this 8-pitch repertoire. I'm imagining that this 8-pitch repertoire is maybe 5.5, with just different slight variations on grip or attempted location or movement or whatever the case may be.
Plus, once you put it in the other team's head, I got a pitch repertoire. They're looking for something, you know. They're looking for anything.
Variations on velocity, variations on movement, variations on location. And with a guy like Bassitt, Griff, because he doesn't throw hard, he mixes speeds, but he doesn't throw hard in the definition of throwing hard in 2023. If he feels he's got to come up, even if it's like subconscious, he's not even necessarily recognizing it at a conscious level, but Danny Jansen's in the game and I've got to make a slight adjustment here. If he comes up too much in the strike zone, because there is so much movement downward on most or all of his pitches, some of those are just going to fall right into barrels. And that's when he gets into trouble.
And the discussions that we've had about Blue Jays catching and Danny Jansen against Alejandro Kirk, I have always maintained that catchers that I know through the years often fall into the trap of throwing or calling pitches to get themselves out. So if it's a 1-2 count, Alejandro Kirk knows, don't throw me a fastball. So throw me a breaking ball somewhere, because I just sit on fastball and I kill fastballs. And so now whoever's at the plate, Alejandro Kirk is going, well, I can't throw this guy a fastball because no, Alejandro, that's you that does that. So the fact that Bassitt calls his own game takes the Kirk mindset out of the equation, which might be another factor of why that relationship works, is because it's not Alejandro Kirk's game that is being called. It's Bassitt's game, and Bassitt knows what gets hitters out, and Kirk is still thinking what's going to get me out. And I think that that's part of what makes it work.
Well, I'll give Chris Bassitt this, and it's a bad time to bring it up because of what happened in Sunday's game in Texas, where the team imploded and he was on the mound for the blowing of that 6-run lead. But to call your own game and to fiddle around with the thing on the wrist, what's it called, Griff?
Pitch comm.
Yeah, pitch comm. So you've probably heard me do this a few times in the first 6 episodes. I don't remember anything anymore. Including sometimes that words that I should know don't just escape me. So that's fantastic. The PitchCom thing on his wrist, fiddling with that, making.
Oh, he's got it on his belt because he had it early on
the wrist, and then he moved it.
Games, and it looked terrible. It
Yeah.
didn't look like baseball. There was no flow. So he's got it where he can just quietly hit the buttons and go right at it.
Yeah. So make the decisions, and within a tight time frame, and then deliver the pitch. I mean, it's impressive stuff. And you know, I said this to you off the air, and I was chatting with a mutual friend of ours in text over the weekend about this too. That, and I don't know Chris Bassitt. You know him better than me. You've been in the clubhouse. You've talked to him. You've scrummed him, etc. He is not the quality of pitcher that Roy Halladay was, or that Max Scherzer was in his prime. But when I hear Chris Bassitt talk, there's that, you can just hear that intensity. Like the sane train might have slightly left the tracks, and he's veered. Like, he is an uber intense warrior out there who's obsessed with this stuff, who continues to want to get better, blind ambition going forward. None of that is a criticism. It's just an observation. It's what makes him good more days than not. But to me, he's got a bit of that animal Halladay, Scherzer-like mentality to him.
Yeah, and what you're saying, if you trace it back, it becomes a commutative theory of horseshit pitching. and Scherzer and Bassitt talked about manipulating the pitch clock while they were teammates with the Mets. So now Bassitt leaves and brings Scherzer's knowledge and discussion with him because, as you said, Scherzer's stuff is a notch above Bassitt. So Bassitt comes to the Blue Jays with the Scherzer discussion in tow and passes it on to Alek Manoah, who's a 24-year-old, 25-year-old kid who really is trying to manipulate his own brain and not the pitch clock. And now he is using some of these ideas that he's had, because that pitching staff, that starting rotation, sits around and they talk all the time. Now Manoah says, I can make myself a better pitcher doing this. Well, you were good enough to finish third in Cy Young balloting last year. Forget all that stuff. So it's the commutative theory of making a teammate horseshit.
All right, so I'm just going to write this down. Episode 7, Griff lays Alek Manoah's shitty season at the feet of Chris Bassitt. Somebody
Max
get this.
Scherzer.
Max Scherzer. Oh, okay. All right.
Because it's Scherzer's philosophies that Bassitt has passed on to his young teammate.
Yeah.
And now he's at the
Alek.
He's at the complex trying to figure out how to hold his slider.
Yeah, exactly. Alek, you're just a kid. Go out there and throw the baseball. Don't overthink it.
Before we make this too negative, I honestly believe that in August at the latest, when they go to a 6-man rotation with Hyun-Jin Ryu and the 4 current guys, including Manoah, that Manoah will come back strong and closer to 2022 than he is to early 2023. I honestly believe that. So it's not being negative about it. It's just trying to understand how the kid, because of a pitch clock being introduced in the game, can fall that far that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this. We tweeted about it, and you know me, as I like to say, if we didn't tweet it, we can't prove that we thought it at the time. So I certainly tweeted it. I know you've commented on it in a variety of forums. I think the Manoah thing, it's as much a mental reset as anything else. But to me, you're down there, you're throwing on the side, maybe you're throwing in a complex league, game or two, create a sim game or two that he can throw in, stagger that out, create a schedule, and every single day you're working out, right? You're on the treadmill, you're doing weights, you're doing it all out of the public eye.
And out of Buffalo.
Yeah, I don't know if Alek likes golf, but I use that as an example because it seems to be one that's relatable to a lot of people. Like, if you're a golfer, dude, and your work is done by 2, 3 in the afternoon, go play 18. Really? Like, people are like, well, I shouldn't be on a vacation. This is not a vacation. You're trying to get him right for the most important part of the season, which is to come. And to your point about a 6-man rotation in Hyunjin Ryu, Griff, I will grant you that, but I'm not assuming anything about Hyunjin Ryu. Like, to me, if this guy comes back and keeps them in ball games for 5 innings every 6th day or 7th day, that works for me. If he comes back and looks like the guy who was a 2020 Toronto Blue Jay or a healthy LA Dodger, and you have to delineate between health and not health for Ryu's time with the Dodgers as well. If he looks like that guy, that is just a cherry on the whipped cream on the Sunday. That would be great. But I would think going into a Ryu start that some relievers are going to be used that day.
Yeah, and when you look at it as in August, if it does as predicted here on Exit Philosophy, if it does happen that on August 3rd they go to a 6-man rotation the day after the trade deadline when they know where they stand in terms of personnel, the 5th and 6th starters are guys that finished 3rd in AL Cy Young balloting the last 2020 for Ryu and 2022 for Manoah. That's a pretty good 5th and 6th addition. And my point here is that the coaching staff, when the Manoah decision was made to send him down to be rebuilt in terms of his repertoire at the PDC, I believe that the coaching staff and the front office already knew that they only needed, if I could figure it out, they can figure it out, that they only needed a 5th starter using the off days on the 17th of June, on July the 1st, and after the All-Star break on July 22nd. So they knew that this was the window in which to send Manoah to get him fixed, because they knew they only needed that spot 3 times. If they put everybody on their 5th day, and just nobody's pitching on short rest, but they are pitching on their 5th day, and they're not taking advantage of that extra off day. But that leads to a 6-man rotation for the final 2 months, saving bullets for October. They don't want everybody on the 5th day for the final 2 months, so they get 6 men, all legitimate major league pitchers when they're healthy. And, there you go. And they thought about it long and hard before sending Manoah down. Hopefully for them, he comes back whole and ready to go. And I believe he will. Then we'll see what happens.
But if someone's struggling, and I don't care what his name is, but I'm going to go with the most likely people to struggle for the sake of this conversation. Kikuchi, Manoah, based on what we've seen this year. I know you feel he's going to bounce back. He's more of a 2024 guy for me. Anything this year, 2023 would be a bonus. If he comes back and looks great and salvages his stats for the season, that would be a huge help. But the guy's most likely to struggle. I am going to be thinking this, and I don't necessarily fancy myself a man of the people. That would be a little too much hubris to just assume that I reflect the thoughts of the general population. But I'll say, Griff, if they are life and death to make a wild card playoff spot, and Kevin Gausman is not out there every 5th day, people are going to be screaming, ranting, and raving. And I know you're saying save bullets until October, but what about the idea of, and I think Barrios, if he continues at his pace, falls into this conversation as well. What about the idea of keeping 1 or 2 guys in your rotation, pitching every 5th day, and then working the edges, the Kikuchis, Manoahs, and Ryus in when it fits?
And then you end up with a wild card situation, and a guy goes out there, starting pitcher goes out there, and he doesn't have enough bullets left.
You think you don't think Gausman?
However, this was all built in to griffsthepitch.com calculations, and the sixth.
Your son Pat's gonna be mad at me again. It's off the top, Scott. Promote off the top, Pat. I apologize.
So the 6-man rotation only includes the Ryu spot 7 times from August 3rd until the end of the season. So what you're talking about and having Gausman pitch as often as possible is built into that. It's built into what I have calculated for the final 2 months. If you're using 6-man, you don't use them all equally, but you use your aces or who has evolved and developed. And we know Gausman's going to be at the top of that heap. And hopefully Barrios continues to improve and be as solid as he's been. And hopefully Bassitt gets the right catcher behind the plate and is able to get those low pitches and get ahead in the count and be the Bassitt that he's showed when he threw a 9-inning one-hitter. That is the situation you're looking for. You're trying to maximize that. But if you're using a 4-man rotation now, you have to make up for that later in the season when you have the ability to bring Ryu back in and Manoah back in.
Yeah, but as long as in a 4-man rotation, you're not throwing anybody on short rest.
No, nobody
right?
is.
They're not doing that.
July 1st, Canada Day. It'll be this year's Victoria Day debacle where where Trevor Richards is the starter and people are going, what? It's
the Jays don't have a starting pitcher in Toronto on Canada Day. What's this? It's a Bo Bichette rest day. Huh? What? What's happening here? What's happening? No, I get hesitant, Griff, and you laid it out, responded in the way that I was hoping you would, and I hope they're thinking that way. I get hesitant with the notion of not having your best starting pitcher out there at every available opportunity. And if we are living in a world now where throwing every 5th day is costing you bullets, and teams are looking at these expanded rotations, a 6-man rotation, and that's going to cost you a start or two for Gausman down the stretch, right? Unless he's throwing every 5th day. And to me, if your life and death, if you're 10 games clear leading the American League East, which the Blue Jays very definitely are not, it's one thing. It's another thing when your life and death to make the playoffs, which it appears the Blue Jays will be.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the last few years and 2 words that together we've only recently seen in sports: load management. The leaders in the American League in the last 2 or 3 years are 33 starts or 32 starts. And under this equation, under this scenario, you're going to have Gausman making 33, 34. So he'll be right up there with the leaders. And I don't think it's a matter of panicking and saying, oh, we got to get him out there every 5 days, no matter what off days or who else is in the rotation. You got to get him because that's a lot to ask in this day and age of a starting pitcher to give you 6-7 innings, 110 pitches, and do it every 5 days, even though you have off days in other starters.
GriffsThePitch.com, which Griff mentioned a couple of minutes ago. That's where you can get the full catalog of Griff's work, multiple weekly columns, a weekly MLB power rankings. Our podcast, Exit Philosophy, is linked to GriffsThePitch.com, and Griff has exclusive interviews with a bunch of former Blue Jays, bunch of former Expos, and we're going to get to this a little bit later on in this episode, but the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame induction weekend just went down in St. Mary's. Of course, Griff was there, a Jack Graney Award winner himself, and I'm imagining some pretty cool content is coming to GriffsThePitch.com, partly in the form of audio interviews from some of the people Griff ran into on the weekend. So GriffsThePitch.com. Vladdy, Griff, I feel like we're doing this weekly now. Look, you and I aren't going to sit here and question the kid's capabilities. We know what he can do. We've seen it. He set an unbelievably high bar in 2021. But every time we get together, it's on a weekly basis, and we're waiting. And we're waiting. And we're waiting. There has been a period of time where Bo has carried this team offensively this year. They got off to a tremendous start at the start of the season. They were 18-9 after 27 games. If you remember that, Matt Chapman was a huge part of the offense and the production of the offense at that time. He went through very early, we almost forget it now, but he went through a phase where he carried the team offensively. We have not seen Vlad carry the team offensively yet this year. And I don't even know if that is where we should have our sights set. We just need this kid lofting the ball a little bit more and staying in the strike zone, that elite batter's eye. I think it starts there, and everything else will fall into place if he just gets a little more disciplined. I think he's pushing way too hard now, and baseball is not a try harder, get better sport.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it. But, and mentioning Chapman in April, Vlad needs to have a Chapman-like month of July, because that's a key month. If you go into August and you're still struggling and you're still a handful of games above 500, then it's going to change their decisions in terms of reaching out to acquire more bullpen help, whatever it does. But he needs to do it ASAP, and that means the month of July. And we talked about it. We talked about the fact that every once in a while he'll get a call of a strike 3 or 4 inches off the plate, and you can see in his reaction that it's bothering him too much for an elite major league MVP candidate type player. And when it bothers him, then the next pitch is a slider down and away, and he opens up and he reaches for it and he strikes out, and you just see the body language going back to the dugout. And to say he doesn't carry that into the field is ridiculous, because we've also seen his body language in the field when he's struggling at the plate. And there was a play where he turned and made a nice play on the line and turned and threw it past Bassitt to open the door for a big inning for the Rangers. And that's just not who he is when he's going well at the plate. He's an elite defender. And again, it can't go beyond July. At some point in the month of July, Vlad has to carry the team, maybe not for the entire month, but for 10 days, where they win 8 out of 10 and get back into wild card contention, where they're not looking and saying, hey, we're only a half game out of the wild card. We're there. We're right there. You can't play the entire final 4 months like that. You need to be in position to be chasing or to be looking up at Tampa going, hey, maybe we can catch those guys if we have a great streak. They can't be looking and going, oh, we're only half game out of the 3rd wild card spot, and we're on a pace to win 85 games. No, you got to be much better than that going in, and Vlad is the big part of reaching that stage of the season.
Yeah, and just to your point, the standings on Monday morning, June 19th, as we sit here, the Yankees are playing like crap, right? The Yankees have lost 7 of their last 10, lost 4 in a row. You know who's done the exact same thing? The Houston Astros lost 4 in a row, 7 of their last 10. Those two teams, the Yankees and Astros, are tied right now for the final wild card spot with the Blue Jays a half game back. How about the LA Angels? I mean, they've won 7 of 10. They're now in the 2nd wild card spot. So the 3 wild card teams of the playoffs started today would be the Orioles in this order: the Orioles, the Angels, and one of the Yankees or Astros. Like the LA Angels, Perry Manazian, Alex Anthopoulos' former AGM in Toronto here, and was with him in Atlanta as well, has the biggest decision in, the Angels won the World Series in 2002, and outside of that, they've employed Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, but like, what else? This is like the biggest, well, it's an earth-shaking decision for the LA Angels today. I don't know how to compare it to their entire history. The Shohei Ohtani situation, he's a free agent at the end of the year. He's going to make $500 million at least on his next contract, and he is a Cy Young. He'll get consideration for the Cy Young. He is leading the league in a lot of offensive metrics. He's going to be the American League MVP, undisputed this year, barring the unforeseen. I don't think you can trade him. Why do you have Mike Trout if the aim is to not make the playoffs? And you're not playing a 1-game wild card to get in anymore, Griff. You got a best of 3. I think they got to hold on to Ohtani if they stay anywhere near this race, and there's no indication that they're going to fall far enough away between now and the trade deadline to justify a deal, unless they lose 15 in a row.
Yeah, there's no way, because the reason of signing Ohtani originally and teaming him with Mike Trout is to be where they are right now, is to be in contention for the postseason. And it's been so long with the two most talented players in baseball, arguably. And now you're going to suggest trading Ohtani at the deadline because he's a free agent at the end of the year. That makes zero sense. And they need to ride it out, see where he is, see what his value is, and make a strong bid at keeping him if they go deep into October, or even make it into October, because it's something that hasn't happened with these two guys together. So let's play it out and see how far they can take you.
I wanted to bring this up when we were talking the Jays Rangers series a little bit earlier, so I'm going to come back to it now. Remember, like 10 minutes ago, I copped to the fact that I forget things.
Yeah, you forgot to mention griffsthepitch.com.
Well, I forgot that. And Bruce Bochy. I mean, the guy's a hell of a manager. There's no way he goes to Texas if he doesn't have a sense that they're all in and legitimately ready to turn the corner. And it started with Semien and Seager last year, and Marcus didn't have a very good year in Texas last season, but he has come right back around and all of that. You've spent more time with Bochy than me, but in his last season in San Francisco in 19, they come into town in April, and I'm hovering around the batting cage as visitors BP starts, Griff. And everybody talks about the size of Bruce Bochy's melon.
Yeah, yes.
It isn't just the head, it's the hands and the feet. And, you know, he was a catcher, so he's kind of got that knock-kneed, he walks like it looks like his knees hurt. Right? I mean, he's an older dude now. And I was watching him walk, a pleasant guy. Like, he kind of looked over at a bunch of us standing there and just smiled like he had no reason, didn't know me from Adam. But I'm watching him walk, and it's like it was almost like a clay head, clay hands, and clay feet stuck on a otherwise regular-sized human body.
And when he opens his mouth to speak, the voice matches everything you've just described. He's very stentorian when he speaks, and like you go, this is a package right here. Yeah. This guy was born to be a manager, because when he talks, you can't help but pay attention if you're one of his players. Love the guy.
Yeah, and just think of the success that he's had too. And you talk about a guy with timing. And maybe some of this is obvious, but he would know far better than us because he's living it every single day. But he knew when to get out of San Diego, right? He had taken a bunch of Padres teams, the Jake Peavy teams, when Petco Park was new. He took he also took the 98 Padres to the World Series. He goes back that far to Jack Murphy or Qualcomm. But he knew when to get out, goes north to San Francisco, bing, bing, bing. A dynasty, 10, 12, and 14, Posey, Bumgartner, those guys. And he retires after the 2019 season, sort of bides his time, recalibrates. And he's got the Texas Rangers ahead of the defending world champion Houston Astros in the American League West with no signs of slowing down, despite the fact Jacob deGrom really hasn't pitched for them at all this year, their major free agent signing from the winter, and isn't going to pitch for them until the second half of next year at the earliest, if it ever happens.
Yeah, and you look at the Rangers, and as we said to begin this conversation, he knew what he was getting into. He wouldn't have come back to manage a team unless he knew it was a contender. And you look at the weekend series against the Blue Jays, and in Sunday's game with Bassitt pitching, the 8th and 9th hitters that nobody's heard of combined for 7 hits against the Blue Jays. 7 hits, a bunch of extra base hits and RBIs. And so it's not just the middle of the infield. You got Jonah Heim, a nice Buffalo boy, catching and just tearing it up. And he's got weapons. He's got pitching. He's got a bullpen that's pretty solid. Watch out don't sleep on the Rangers when it comes to October.
A good ball club. Jonah Heim, devout member of Bill's Mafia. Yeah. I wonder if he's been choke slammed or if he does the choke slamming. Those tailgates.
Good question.
Go ahead.
That's it. I
Yeah.
was just
Okay.
complimenting you on your observational humor.
Yeah. Well, Jerry Seinfeld, me. Actually, there are a lot of people in between.
That's like Max Scherzer, Bassitt.
Yeah. Yeah. Something's missing. Something's missing. All right. The Marble Rye episode.
Yes.
Juneteenth is today as we sit here on Monday, June the 19th. And this is a relatively new federal holiday in the United States. It's been observed for a couple of years now that marks the emancipation of the enslaved in the United States. My little bit of social commentary would be, as far as we have come, we have a much longer way to go, and in some ways I'm worried we're headed backwards. But this is a day that marks the emancipation of the enslaved in the United States, June the 19th, 1865. And Griff, we want to talk about this. Has been an ongoing discussion that comes up every now and then in baseball circles. I feel like it's been going on for 15 or 20 years. But when I was a kid, and we don't have to keep this to the Blue Jays, but for the sake of the example, I will. My first favorite Blue Jay was Willie Upshaw. My next favorite Blue Jay was the guy who replaced Willie Upshaw at first base, Fred McGriff. The great Blue Jays outfield, which was the best in baseball in the mid to late 80s. Barfield, who you saw this weekend at the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. Jesse Barfield in right with that cannon for an arm. The shaker in center field. Lloyd Mosby. George Bell, who is Latin American, but who is black. Tony Fernandez. Like, you can go on down the list, fast forward into the future, the Shannon Stewarts and Vernon Welleses of the world. You go on down the list of great black players who have played for the Blue Jays. And now the Blue Jays really don't have many black players. And if you look around the game, there are some elite players. Like Marcus Stroman is having a wonderful year for the Cubs. An ex-Blue Jay, Byron Buxton, is an elite player. Though that's just to name two. But the sport is lacking in black African-American representation. And it is a problem that has been going on for a while now and has yet to be solved.
Yeah, I mean, the current number for African-American players in Major League Baseball is 7.2%. There's 28.5% Latino, Hispanic, heritage, mostly Caribbean. The NFL is 56.4%, and the NBA obviously has the highest percentage, 75%. But the question becomes, and it comes up, especially on days like Jackie Robinson Day, where there were a lot of teams, including the Blue Jays, who had 0 African Americans on their active roster on that day, which is embarrassing for the game. I believe it is, because there's so many athletes, multi-sport kids who could choose baseball but don't choose baseball. I mean, you mentioned some of the African Americans in the game right now. Byron Buxton, you got Marcus Semien, Marcus Stroman, Hunter Green, Cedric Mullins. Andrew McCutchen is an inspiration to a lot of that group. And Curtis Granderson is working after his retirement, former Blue Jay and former a lot of teams, started with the Tigers. But he's working on this problem, and I know they have reviving baseball in the inner city. They have a lot of initiatives, but Scotty, let's discuss some theories as to why this is happening and why great athletes don't choose baseball.
Well, I think we need to first start, Griff, by declaring, as a couple of white guys living in Toronto or the greater Toronto area, our ignorance to a lot of this. But my thought would be access is an issue, and you hear a lot of the top basketball players who've gone in to the NBA and had stellar careers saying, look, I mean, all we needed to do was find a basketball, and then we went down the street and found a public park that had a basketball court, and we just started playing, and we played street ball every day. And, you know, then we got in with our school teams. And I really think access has a lot to do with it. And I think the path, if you happen to be an elite athlete, and we're weighing this on a scale here, so I'm not suggesting it is in any way easy, but weighing it on a scale, all things relative, I think the path for elite athletes to the NBA or through the college ranks to the NFL is clearer, not necessarily easier because of the challenges, but is clearer than the path to Major League Baseball, where you get drafted and then you're thrown into the minor league system. And if you're not a high draft pick, you don't get a major, massive signing bonus, and you can get lost in the shuffle unless you happen to stand out in those low A and single A situations, and you just get caught in the churn. So I think access when kids are young, combined with the relative challenges of each path to these different leagues, is another factor.
Yeah, I think the exclusivity factor, where young athletes are being asked to choose their sport, like in baseball, for instance, now it's a 12-month thing. You got showcases in the summer when you're not going to school, and you're being told, you play baseball or you play whatever sport you want. And even Wayne Gretzky and all those guys that turned out to be elite athletes in other sports or in baseball were allowed to be multi-sport. In fact, encouraged it. And to me, what you part of what you discussed with, you get drafted into the major, or you get drafted by a major league team, and now you spend 3 or 4 years hidden in the minor leagues. And who knows when you get to the major leagues, if you're a bench player, it takes you a while to get in. There's very few elite players who get there quicker than that 3 or 4 year period coming out of college. And in the meantime, if you stuck with basketball, and if you went to a major university, major program, and you're one and done, and you go to the NBA, you're on the court. You're one of 5 guys in the spotlight of an NBA team, and your endorsement opportunities arrive more quickly. And everything about it for baseball is, we're looking for a finished product before we allow you on the field. I think if they took elite players, because we see enough bad fundamentals in the game today anyway. So take your elite players, encourage them that they're going to be coming up to the majors more quickly than they thought. Get them there, teach, Major League Baseball always felt that we're not a teaching level, that you should know everything by the time you get there. Well, we watch the game played badly every day. And I think that to compete for elite athletes, not just African Americans, but any elite athlete, you got Kyler Murray.
Kyler Murray, yeah. Arizona Cardinals, Oakland A's.
He was drafted first round by the A's, and then he chose football, and it looks to me like he made the wrong choice, because the careers in the NFL are much shorter. So there are ways to get it, but it is a problem when only 7.2% of your players are African American, and in the 70s and 80s, the level was in the 30s actually. And you mentioned some. I mean, in Montreal with the Expos, there was Andre Dawson and Tim Raines and Hubie Brooks and Rodney Scott and Ronald Floor, and there were all these great players, African American players, and you just don't see it anymore. I mean, Jay Jackson is the only one, the relief pitcher, who has been with the Blue Jays at all this year.
I'm sorry, Andre Dawson, the great Chicago Cub.
No, the great. For whom my son Patrick Andre is named. So
okay. No, I wanted to see, though, if you're watching on YouTube, you saw the look on Griff's face on top of the no.
Correction.
No. That is not the case.
Incorrect.
Let's hope for increased participation. I said this about LGBTQ plus a couple of weeks ago when we were dealing with the Anthony Bass stuff, and just how many kids get chased away from professional sports in general because maybe they have a stereotypical high-pitched laugh, or they skip to first base or whatever, and they get bullied off their teams, and they don't pursue sports because they're made to feel like they're not a fit. Like, we've been robbed of potential Hall of Fame careers as a result of that, and we'll never know it because we can't prove negatives. The same is true. One would think that there are African-American athletes who have selected basketball or football or other sports who could also have selected baseball first and perhaps been Hall of Fame ball players. And we as baseball fans have been robbed of their talent, if we want to look at it from a selfish perspective, because they didn't see a place for them in the game. And it should not be that way. Should not be that way. Quickly on Kyler Murray, he won't play most of this year for the Arizona Cardinals because he tore his ACL last December in a game, but he managed, Griff, to secure the bag. So I think he's got like $100 and some million guaranteed coming to him, even if he had never played another NFL football game. So, you know, we don't need to cry.
Yeah, God bless
for Kyler Murray. Also, he plays my 49ers twice a year, so I'm not disappointed that he's out. Shout out to our buddy Toronto Mic'd. You and I did the Toronto Mic'd podcast last Thursday as we sit here on Monday morning, June the 19th. And on that episode, we started, or Mike started, to take you down the road of the 1994 baseball strike and you landing in Toronto with the Toronto Star in 1995. And I mean, the story in and of itself on the surface, Griff, is fascinating. But when we look at our lives, there are particular moments where decisions get made that among the thousands of decisions we make each and every week, like 998 or 999 of those have zero consequence. Am I going to have Cheerios or Rice Krispies for breakfast? That's a decision. Nobody cares, right? Have at it. Mix them. Who cares? But for you, for your wife, Debbie, and your kids who were young at the time, 94 into 95 was arguably the biggest life decision that you and your family ever made, as you made the decision to leave the Montreal Expos and come to Toronto to write columns for the Star.
Yeah, it was interesting going back over that material on Toronto Mike, and really enjoyed that podcast with him. But it brought back how big that decision was. And you're right, Scotty, it was huge. I remember, August 11th was the last day of the Major League season before the strike hit. And earlier in August, Tim Harper, who was working for the Toronto Star at the time and still is, I believe, he came to me on the field at batting practice, and he said, Dave Perkins wants to talk to you. Can you give him a call? And Dave Perkins, I knew as the baseball columnist for the Toronto Star. I had run across him many times, especially in 92, 93 at the World Series, when I was doing Major League Baseball's game notes and trying to make them as useful and entertaining as possible. And clearly it worked, because I ended up coming to Toronto and writing for the Star with no previous writing experience. In any case, I called Perkins back, and this is before the strike hit. And he said, I'm replacing myself. I'm going to be sports editor at the Star. Do you have any suggestions of people that Canadians? He said, I want to hire a Canadian. And so I suggested Michael Farber, suggested Jeff Blair. There's a couple of others. And then I said, and then there's me. I don't know why I said that, but I said, and then there's me. And I found out later that he wanted me to say that. He was angling. He had already been turned down by Michael Farber, who was married to a beautiful French-Canadian girl, still is, and had his family in Montreal, didn't want to leave. And he said, talk to Griff. So I was tricked in a way, but I played along with it. And then when the strike hit, we kept talking. And when the strike hit, there were factors that came into play that made my decision much easier. And several of those were Eric Osling, our traveling secretary, was laid off. And I was told that they wanted me to handle that role for the 95 season when baseball came back.
So very quickly, traveling secretary is booking the road hotels and
making sure the wives aren't in the same section as the girlfriends in the rooms and stuff and seats, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But so I was going to do that and do the PR, and I was going to do a select number of games on radio as the color voice and doing some play-by-play, which I had already been doing quite a bit of. In fact, it might have been even more than a handful. I might have been doing like half the season on radio, and then a post-game talk show on radio. And I just felt like, and I said, well, how much more money am I going to get? Oh, nothing. This is hard times. We're in a strike, and everybody has to pull together. And then I looked at Claude Brochu and his wife wheeled out of the parking lot in his and hers Mercedes Benzes. And I'm going, oh, some of us have to pull our weight. But yeah, so that all started to add up. Then I started taking voice lessons in studio, radio with Joe Cannon, who was a personality, a radio personality at the time, and was doing color on radio in Montreal. So,
and Joe Cannon, I think that's a name that was in Toronto at the early days of the Fan too, right? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So like it just started to accumulate and add up that I needed to make a change. And who knew how long the Expos were going to remain in Montreal, because I had heard rumors, everybody had heard rumors. And if the strike wasn't settled to the benefit of the small market teams, Claude Brochu had already told me that the team could not survive. The team could not survive. And, like time proved itself with Major League Baseball trying to contract Minnesota and the Expos in 2002. That didn't happen. And then in 2004, after MLB ran the team into the ground, they moved to Washington, and I had already moved to the Toronto Star to write columns. Started slowly, but I don't regret the decision. And look at us now; we're on Exit Philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, it was all leading to this, Griff, right? And,
yeah.
There are going to be these things called podcasts,
right?
And there's going to be this guy called Scott, and we're just going to do one of those together, way the hell down the road.
And
was that an easy conversation with Debbie at the time, or was like is she a Montrealer or a Quebecer?
Yeah, she's a Montrealer, and her family's still there, and her dad is still there. And yeah, it was not an easy conversation, and still is not an easy conversation.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, and here we are. And we were doing our podcast together in 2014 and 15.
We were the baseball podcast. But as I like to say, and we said on Toronto Mike's, Griff, this is the first podcast that has any attempt at promotion behind it.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we are not encumbered by certain limitations. I have to say, and you would know this because you live there, Montreal, if you live there, would be a very hard place to leave, because Montreal is a place to visit, is a very hard place to leave. I love that city. I'm just going to out myself. I love Quebec. I don't like some of the politics of Quebec going on right now, but that's a total conversation for another day and another podcast. But I love Montreal. I love Quebec City. I think some of the most beautiful sights you'll ever see lie along Highway 20 on the St. Lawrence side and the mountains behind it between Quebec City and Rivière-du-Loup. Like it is a gorgeous province, man. And Quebecers are fun.
Yeah.
fun. Like, why would you ever want to leave?
And when I got to the GTA and settled in Oakville, I thought it was like, just looking at maps, that it was relatively close to Pearson, because I was going to do a lot of flying out of there. In Montreal, I lived in Pointe Claire, and it was an 8-minute drive to the airport, not even on the highway. I was right there. And then I got here and close to the airport. Damn, it takes like 45 minutes in rush hour.
Right. It should be 20 minutes from where you live.
Yeah.
I know where you are. It should be about 20 minutes, and it might be 20 minutes at 2:30 in the morning, but when are you ever on the 427 at 2:30 in the morning?
But Scotty, when we talk about it, and we've talked about it often, is for 51 years, I've rolled out of bed every morning and smiled and said, this is what I want to be doing. And
Yep.
like, so when you ask, are there any regrets? Is it a difficult conversation? It may have been, but this is what we do. This is what we've chosen to do. And I've only done 4 different jobs in my life, and that's pretty cool.
It was a totally different time and a different sport. But in my years covering the Ottawa Senators up in Ottawa, I remember very clearly Senators had a morning practice at the game rink at what is now Canadian Tire Center. A lot of their non-game day practices are at the Sensplex in Canada, not too far away. But we were at the game rink, and we were sitting in a section behind the bench watching practice, as we did every day. And Gord Wilson, who's a great friend of mine to this day, and is to this day the Senators' radio color analyst, said to me once, because I've said, Gordy, look at us. We are sitting here watching a bunch of grown men practice hockey and getting paid for it. And he turned to me and he said, shh, don't let anybody else know. Like, as we like to say, right, we are in the toy department of the media and the world. Getting to be around professional sports and baseball for both you and me, Griff, is just the best game for so many different reasons. Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame weekend. You were there. What'd you shoot on Friday, before we get into the nitty-gritty of who you spoke to and how it all went down? The golf tournament.
Yeah, it's a scramble. It's the golf tournament format. So I played 9 holes with one group and the back 9 with another group. And I was one of the better golfers in the first 9 group, and we were 3 under par in the scramble. And then played with some serious golfers from Ingersoll on the back 9. And they didn't want to talk baseball. They just wanted to line up each other's putts. 6 under on the back, 12 under for the round, 60 for the tournament. Yeah, so it was fun, but we didn't get to keep our scores. I hit enough good shots to keep me coming back. And Claude Raymond, who's 86, his group was, wow, this guy can play. And I said, Claude, if you were playing by yourself, you think you could have shot your age? And he said, hell yeah. He's never done it, but I believe that at some point he's going to. He's amazing, and he's the Jean Beliveau in Quebec for baseball that Le Gros Bill was for hockey. There's
so you believe one day he'll shoot his age? So
no doubt. Yeah,
15 years from now he'll shoot 100, 101. Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
And then he'll be laughing.
So give us a layout of the weekend. Some very special names go in this year, and Jesse Barfield, awesome memories I have of him as a boy, sitting out in the bleachers at Exhibition Stadium, watching him man right field, just an absolute cannon for an arm. I'll always remember the front page of the Stars sports section heading into the 1987 season after Jesse had hit 40 home runs in 86. Can Jesse hit 50? Well, the answer was no, and it was in fact George Bell who hit 47 that year in 87 to lead the Blue Jays in home runs. But part of that epic outfield, and John Olerud, if there was a sweeter left-handed swing in the history of the game, not named Ted Williams, you tell me who had it. Maybe Tony Gwynn, Rich Harden, And just take us through it, Griff. You were there. Huge weekend.
Yeah, in fact, you talk about Olerud's swing. I was talking with his mom at the Ferguson Jenkins Way dedication, which was so typically Canadian, because the wrap over the sign, they had the ceremony. Fergie gave his little speech, and then they pulled the rope to bring the cloth down from the sign to reveal the sign. And somebody had put it on like a sock instead of just draping it over the sign, and the rope broke, and somebody was jumping to prove that Canadians can't jump, and they had to get a ladder to get the thing off. And it was a beautiful ceremony. Fergie is so charismatic and a great guy. But the guy who carried the ceremony, who stole the show, was definitely Barfield. I had talked to Barfield in 2021 when they came in for the Winterfest, and I was shepherding him around from interview to interview. I said, Jesse, you're going to be in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame soon. He said, no, that moment is past. That window is closed. I'll never be in. I went, no, like, I'm part of the committee that talks about it, and your name is always front and center. No, it's not going to happen. So I reminded him of that because he was so emotional and so thrilled to be a part of it. But he stole the show with his speech. He had his son Josh there, who of course played in the majors with, I think, San Diego and Cleveland. I remember him most with Cleveland. But Jesse's talking about when he was a 13-year-old kid sitting in the bleachers in right field at Comiskey Park, because he grew up in Joliet, Illinois. And he's sitting there with his friends, and he says, I'm going to be down there soon. At some point, I am going to be standing in that spot. And they're going, come on. And when he got called up by the Blue Jays, the team was in Texas, in Arlington. So he was getting ready to fly to Arlington. They said, no, the series is over. They're going to Comiskey. And when he talked about that, he got so emotional about it, because he told his friends 7 years earlier that he would be there, and that was his first game in the major leagues. And it, that's an amazing coincidence and story. And he talked about his son Josh when he was a kid, and he was at an event with Nolan Ryan, and Nolan Ryan's wife was there, and Josh went over and looked up at Mrs. Ryan and said, I'm Josh Barfield, I'm Jesse's son, and your father has struck out my father a lot.
Kids are the best.
Yeah. So Barfield told that story, and then he looked at Rich Harden and he said, Rich, I looked at the numbers. You have struck out my son a lot.
Great line.
That was
great
so
line.
Good. That was so good. And, Jesse, Olerud was the same thing. Olerud's dad was a doctor who played in the minor leagues for the Winnipeg Whips, which was the first AAA team of the Montreal Expos. So he had reached AAA and AA, and then he became a doctor, and he's a world-renowned doctor. And Olerud's great line was, he was great growing up with my dad, because we would throw in the backyard, and I knew he knew what he was talking about, because he had played pro ball, AAA, AA for 7 years. And then if I got hurt, he was a doctor. He could fix me, right. And I'd be back on the field. So,
right. Yeah.
So they all came with their best. Denny Boucher talked about his game, his first start at Olympic Stadium with Joe Siddle catching and Larry Walker in right field. And there were just so many memories, and the place was jammed with fans. And anybody who has an opportunity to go down there, it's always in the month of June. It's well ahead. There'll be a list of the inductees for next year. But anybody who has a chance to bring their kids, because it's a family situation. It's like Cooperstown, small town, anxious to welcome everybody and show them a good time. I took my daughter, which we go every year, Kelly. She works in Ottawa for Archives Canada, so she's able to critique what that museum in St. Mary's is like. from her experiences. But it's a great family experience, a great experience for anybody who loves baseball, and we all do, as we know. And I'm going to be down there every year. I have been as many years as I can remember. But if you get a chance, if you're listening and get a chance, do it next year.
And I'm going to do my best to take that advice. Maybe come back this way, because I'll be out east by this time next year, but come back this way to enjoy the weekend. Just that thought on Olerud, Griff. We were talking earlier about the minor leagues and just the work you've got to put in. I mean, this is a guy, John Olerud is remembered for a lot of things. Certainly a key part of the 2 Blue Jays World Series teams. He was on that 0-1 Mariners team that won 116 games for Lou Piniella. They went out in the playoffs against the Yankees, but had that incredible regular season. Olerud wore a helmet in the field because of some brain health matters that he had as a younger man, and he never played a game in the minor leagues. He never played a game in the minor leagues. Wild. Came up in 89, right? Was it September of 89 as a call-up? I think.
And he put to rest the story, the great story, the story that won't die of Rickey Henderson. And he told the story on the podium. He said that, he's been asked 5 times just on this weekend, on this Hall of Fame weekend, about the Rickey Henderson story and if it was true. And he said, it's a great story, but it's not true. And for those who aren't aware of what the story is that Olerud played with Rickey Henderson in New York and then in Seattle. And the story is that Rickey walked in on a conversation and he was explaining about the aneurysm and why he wore a helmet in the field, because the doctor said that any blow might create a health issue, a huge health issue. So he wore the helmet in the field, and Rickey Henderson supposedly said, "Hey, that's funny, man, because I played with a guy like that in New York." And it was John Olerud. Yeah. so this is a story that Olerud says started with a trainer in New York who told it in the clubhouse in New York, because they had worked with both Rickey and Olerud, so I thought it was a great story. And it is a great story.
Well,
not true. And then it got in the paper because a writer was in the clubhouse overhearing the story. And once it's in the paper, it becomes absolute fact.
And Rickey's a guy, right? Because he like Rickey Henderson was The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, before The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. Because Rickey would talk in the third person sometimes. Right?
Sometimes.
Back in the day.
All the time. And I'll never forget when he set the stolen base record. I think he goes headfirst into third in a game in Oakland. He's playing for the A's, and he lifts the base up over his head. And, "Today I'm the greatest ever," or whatever he said. But there was and again, is this a real story or not? But there's that story of they're on a bus or they're boarding a bus, probably to go to the airport or from the airport to wherever they were going to play that day's stadium. And there was a young player who had taken a seat near the front of the bus, which would go to the more veteran guys, which Rickey certainly was. And he made some comment offering to get up out of the seat so that Rickey could have it. And Rickey was like, no, it's no big deal. And he looked up and he said, "Rickey, it's yours. You've got tenure." And the story, as the story goes, Rickey looks at him and says, "Tenure? Rickey's got 20 years." But is it real or not? Well, there's in a similar vein, Ron Piche, who's also in the Hall of Fame, was a former pitcher with the Milwaukee Braves, told me the story of the guy sitting in the lobby, and one of their teammates with the Braves looks at the box score, and he's got no hits in the box score, and he says, "I got a hit," and the guy says, "Well, maybe it was a typographical error," and the guy goes, "No, it wasn't. It was a line drive up the middle." And so, I'm sure those are great stories, and a lot of them probably are just myth, but they're all great, and that's why we love the game.
Oh, and Ricky was, I mean, what a player, right?
Ricky loved Ricky.
And for such a long, like, I know he bounced around a lot at the end, you know, Olerud's teammate in New York and Seattle, but he was like, he was an Oakland A 4 times. I think he was a Padre at some point. Like
Yeah.
they just kept finding jobs.
You got to consider Ricky Henderson and Reggie Jackson the two greatest Oakland A's in history. I mean, there's just
no doubt.
nobody. Kent Seiko had a couple of flash years, McGuire, but yeah, those two guys stand above everyone else in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. I love how we went from Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame to Ricky Henderson. All thanks to John Olerud.
Yeah, thanks to John Olerud.
Yeah, but a shout out to all who were inducted this weekend in St. Mary's, and glad it was such a wonderful weekend as it is every year. So we'll leave it there, Griff, and put a wrap on episode 7 of the Exit Philosophy podcast. griffsthepitch.com. That's where you can get everything Griff does, multiple weekly columns, a weekly MLB power rankings, and our podcast, Exit Philosophy, is linked to griffsthepitch.com. Exclusive
conversations.
Interviews, conversations, interviews, which I'm sure there will be some new ones coming up from the weekend you just had in St. Mary's. So check that out. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube page here, like this episode. It always helps. We love to be in that algorithm. And if you prefer the audio, because these two mugs just are too much, we're available on all the audio platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it.
Perfect. Appreciate it, Scotty. Thanks again. Episode 7, that's a wrap. And we'll talk to you next week.
Peace out.